Good morning, everybody. Salam alaikum. I'm happy to see so many people here on this Sunday morning. So thank you for coming. I'm now under Baki. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, which is also known as the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. So we have a nickname now, CCF. And I want to just give you a little bit about what we do. We do quite a few things, but our two biggest projects are our family conference for families of Muslim political prisoners, which we have once a year, and families come together, they meet other families in the same situation. We're working on lobbying right now. We have a bill we want to pass, and so that's one of the big projects. And just a little preview of what's to come. This Invention Terrorist is just hot off the press, and you can get your copy here afterwards for a donation. And you're going to hear more about it. We have going to be talking about it. And our other big project right now, there's 240 political prisoners on our list that we want to send a Ramadan gift to of $100. And we have raised about $2,000. And we want to go another $15,000 we'd like to raise. And I think these gifts are very important to them when they're in prison, far from home. And it's Ramadan and you want to buy special food, because our gift will allow that to happen. And I'm really happy to have our moderator, Dr. Jonathon Brown. And many of you probably know who he is. He's a scholar of Islamic studies, very renowned. I admire him greatly. Actually, he's also a good friend, so I'm really happy to have him here. I'm happy to have all our speakers, and he will tell you more about the rest of them. Thank you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Our learning thing this weekend is I need to buy a little bit of Hawa for these because I had one yesterday and I can't wear the same one. They wrinkle a lot, so I wonder where another one. Anyone else want to donate to me, I'll take it. Thanks for coming. Sorry I was cold. So NCPCF, now CCF, both Coalition for Protect Civil Freedoms, is a very important organization, and it's a very gutsy organization. And back when it started, that was, it was kind of scary, like writing letters to prisoners or sending them money and advocating for people who were being, basically victims of essentially entrapment by the government. It was something that was sort of really, really felt like you're out in the cold and afraid. But now, I think there's been a much larger awareness among the Muslim community and America in general about what kind of injustices are perpetrated by law enforcement against minorities. So actually, it's now kind of almost edgy and cool to donate money. So I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about the importance of, somebody who's in prison who feels like they're forgotten by the world, right? No one wants you. There's the Eric Clapton song, "Nobody knows you when you're down and out." Nobody knows you and wants to talk to you when you're being accused of something, and nobody wants to take care of you when you're in prison. People forget about you. And so doing things like giving prisoners money so they can have food in Ramadan, sending them letters, even just you don't know who they are, just saying, hey, I'm writing this letter, I just want you to know people remember you, people thinking about you. This is really, really important. It takes a very small amount of effort on your part, a very small amount of money. I really want to encourage you to donate today. Or you can go to the NCPCF website and donate there, but you can also donate in the back today. This is the amount of good you can do with a small donation is almost unparalleled. Okay, so we have a very interesting panel today. Originally, the plan was Sheikh Omar speaks last to hold you all hostage. Right? Okay, maybe I should have used that language. To convince you to stay non-compulsive means. But he has to go catch his air for flight, and I know how often he's away from his family, so I fully understand he's already getting home early. But if I see people leaving after he leaves, I'm going to take pictures of you, I'm going to follow you afterwards, I'm going to embarrass you. Right? So I want you to think about this. He's like the Tainty Samosa at the beginning of the meal. But I don't want you to leave after he's done. You have to stay for the spinach and the meat and the potatoes. It's really going to nourish you. It's the most also nourish you. I want to track this value. Okay. So each speaker is going to speak for about 20 minutes. Omar Suleiman, although he's 10 years older than me, he's more mature than me. My colleague and friend, Omar Suleiman is the founder and president of the Ukrainian Institute for Islamic Research, and he's an adjunct professor of Islamic Studies at the Graduate Studies Program at Southern Methodist University. He's also a resident scholar at Valley Ranch Islamic Center and co-founder of Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square. He holds a bachelor's in accounting, a bachelor's did you want to know about taxes? And he's doing his PhD in Islamic Studies at the University of Malaysia. It must be hard to get to class. And he's going to speak to us, and then he's going to go to the airport. So that's what
I've had some really awkward introductions, but I've never in my life. Yeah, and I don't know, also meat, potatoes, broccoli, spinach. We can dissect all of that later on. But I do want to actually take a moment, inshallah, for us to really to grieve and to pray and to think about our brothers and sisters in humanity, our Christian brethren, and those that are struggling in Sri Lanka right now for the terrible news that came out of Sri Lanka. The reason why I'm actually catching an earlier flight was to attend the community vigil that we're hosting in Dallas tonight to show some strength and solidarity with our broader community. And it was just really surreal this morning having a panel on Christchurch, where I had the blessing of actually assisting in preparing the bodies for the graves and praying on them. And then you wake up to the morning news of Sri Lanka. And I think that it's a reminder that the world is becoming more and more chaotic, that we're going to, have all of these things that take place that can potentially not just depress us. I think all of us are overloaded with sadness, overburdened by a great sense of sadness because of the consistency of this war. Of course, we become numb to it all, and it just starts becoming another item to share and to hashtag and to move on from. But also to recommit ourselves to being agents of change and unity and love and harmony and upholding the rights of people and upholding the dignity of people at the end of the day. One of the things that I always admire about our deen is that when Islam speaks about issues that supposedly have no connection to one another, it always frames those issues within common themes. So the sanctity of the human being is the theme that we would use when we're talking about the victims of a terrorist attack or those that were victimized in the name of a terrorist attack in the aftermath. Human dignity and the sanctity of people. So we pray for our brothers and sisters in Sri Lanka and around the world. As I mentioned in the panel over there, I was actually last week speaking to some brothers from Sri Lanka who were part of some of the vicious anti-Muslim violence in Sri Lanka that took place a couple of years ago. In fact, the place that I lectured 2 years ago was burned down. After I left, at some point it was attacked and burned down, so it's been a tense environment there. And they were talking about how in the last year they fostered really strong interfaith ties and how they felt good about where they were as a community now, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and otherwise in Sri Lanka. So obviously this attack does a lot to that community, and we pray for the best for that community and for our world, our humanity as a whole, and the great implications of that. This topic, anything that I say is not going to be as intelligent as what the speakers after me will say in regards to ramifications, in regards to actionable items that we can take upon ourselves to either support people that are doing work that is out of our domain or utilize what we have in terms of our voices and resources and potential to work for this group of people that have been victimized in a very dirty way. I saw it firsthand in Dallas, Texas, with HLF. We've seen it with multiple cases where one of the things that ends up happening is that when you take someone and you charge them with such a heinous crime, then it doesn't matter how strong the evidence that points to their innocence is. Any type of defense of that person or that person's right makes you complicit in the terror or in the crime that they're being accused of. And that's the only thing that I can speak to. As a Muslim community that is constantly under the burden of this Islamophobia industry, this billion-dollar industry, what you see happening in the industry of Islamophobia is that the community collectively is made too toxic to touch. All of our mainstream institutions, all of our mainstream leaders have all of these labels that are thrown on them, have all of these hit pieces that are written on them. All of these networks are imagined and then created online, so that we're too toxic to touch. We're too toxic to be afforded the basic rights of a community here in the United States. So when a civil liberties or civil rights organization or a faith group wants to extend a hand of compassion and to show support and solidarity, they go online and they find 50 pieces, and they don't take the time to verify a single one of those pieces or claims, but it's enough to make that person, that community, that organization untouchable. It's enough to make it costly for a person running for office to appear at their conventions and conferences like they would for any faith community and to speak to their constituents. It's enough to make us suspicious. And that's the point. If the suspicion is strong enough, then the solidarity will never go beyond, some sort of private help, if even that wouldn't cost a person or another organization their own public credibility in associating themselves with these types of institutions and these types of figures. And it's very easy to target a minority because it's very easy to tie people together. We're a small community here as a Muslim community in the United States, so everybody that's influential to some extent has probably met everybody else, or 75% of other people that are influential. So it's very easy to say this person met this person works for this organization, and then somehow you end up in the Taliban. It's really interesting, how I watch those connections and those the way that those hit pieces draw themselves out, and I say, subhanAllah, it's amazing. And a repeated lie in every single hit piece about a person somehow makes it fact, right? Somehow makes it the truth that you now have to defend yourself against as a figure or as a community. The worst part about this is that these types of tactics are carried out against the best of us. People that actually have the capacity to bridge the gaps in our society as it exists today between faith communities, between marginalized communities, people that can affect meaningful change in society because of no other reason but their influence, are targeted by these networks, made toxic, and who suffers as a result of that? Not just that person or that organization, not just the Muslim community, but society as a whole, because it sends a message to other activists, it sends a message to other people that want to champion good causes, that the industry that will target you is too powerful to allow you to rise. Therefore, stay in your lane, remain polarized, remain isolated, so that the industry can continue to work as it works. So drawing the network wide, implicating as many people as possible, making you toxic, allowing public opinion to be swayed against you so that institutions that are supposed to protect you the way that they're supposed to protect any American or any human being cannot or would not be willing to do so. Think about all of that now in the capacity of a political prisoner. You're not just accused of knowing someone who's a terrorist, or knowing someone who knows someone who knows someone that once drove a car for someone who's a terrorist. You yourself now are being implicated in a horrific crime. Who's going to champion your cause? Who's going to continue to raise your name in the public space? Who's going to dare stand behind organizations that will insist on your basic rights, when this is going to be a blotch on your record for the rest of your life? He testified as a character witness for so-and-so in 1995. All he did was something legal. He was told to He was asked to speak about the character of a person that's being accused of something. He didn't speak to his innocence or to his complicity, none of that. But that is enough to get someone, or to put someone in a certain bucket to where their capacity to enact change in society and to empower others through their own empowerment, that's enough to paralyze all of that and cripple all of that. So my message to you is very simple as Muslims, that if we walk away from people just because the crime that they're being accused of is that grievous, even if there's absolutely no evidence to tie them to it, if we simply turn our backs on names that have become too toxic due to the generation of hit pieces and of suspicion about those people, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Inna nasa idha ra'u al-munkar la yughayyiruna awshaka an yarhamullah." When people see evil and they don't do anything about it, they're all saturated in that evil eventually. Who's next? Right? So to insist upon the rights, the basic rights and civil liberties and dignity of people, and to at the same time be unequivocal in standing up against the terror that we're being accused of. Not them, because they've been accused of that terror, but actually being proactive in working against hateful ideologies and those terror networks and whatever it may be. Those two things can exist together. They can exist together. We can actually have a voice in both. Even if people tell us that we cannot, even if the hit pieces continue to be generated, we cannot walk away from people just because a certain narrative has been created about them with absolutely no evidence to it. And we cannot walk away from the organizations that champion their rights, just as should be done with any other community, with any other group of people. When you study the civil rights movement here in this country, that is exactly how you got people to walk away from certain black activists in this country who were committed to liberation, and you accuse them of something so heinous that the community no longer would take them seriously, the community no longer would find them worthy of having their basic dignity and their basic rights upheld. So I'm going to have to get to the airport, as was mentioned. The samosa's leaving. But I implore you to stay. I implore you to listen. I implore you to act, to figure out how you best can support this effort, to support this initiative, to support political prisoners, people that have been demonstrated to be free of the accusations, as you'll find in the reports that we presented today. I encourage you to please stay, listen. This is the more important part of the program. I'm just trying to set the tone from an Islamic perspective, inshallah, from an ethical perspective, and had it not been for the fact that I'm trying to get home just to be able to stand with our Christian brothers and sisters today, then I would have remained on my original flight at 2:44, and I also would have been a part of the rally that's going to take place afterwards. So please stay for the entirety of the session and also participate in everything that follows. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
All right. I just wanted to welcome point to make, because we have to remember, let's say someone's actually guilty of what they're accused of and they're in prison. Does that mean they shouldn't be able to have proof around the law? Right? So there's actually a lot of questions we have to ask ourselves. And actually ask yourself about what kind of person you are, what kind of friend you are. Are you a person who will turn your back on your friends if they have a bad day or if they get involved in something messy and awful, or are you going to be there to support them? Maybe you don't support what they did, obviously, but you're going to be there to make sure that they're going to get letters, they're going to get food, they're going to get visited. In a lot of ways, our society pushes us to be almost sort of Manichaean in the way we think about, when someone is good and evil. When someone is transgressed into the territory of wrongdoing, we sort of cut them off and ostracize them. That's ridiculous. Even if someone's guilty of a crime, they're still part of society. They still have rights. And this is very important to keep in mind. Okay, so our next speaker is Kathy Manley. Kathy Manley is a criminal defense attorney and one of the attorneys for Yassine Arab, remember that case in New York. Since 2010, she has served as the legal director for the Coalition for Civil Freedom, Now a solo practitioner, Kathy was before at Kim Shanks and Associates from 1997 to 2016. Her main emphasis is criminal defense and constitutional rights. She concentrates on appeals, writing appeals, and motions, and has written many winning briefs before the New York State Court of Appeals. Kathy works with many civil rights groups, including Project Salam, Muslim Solidarity Committee. She's also the president of the Albany chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. She has received many awards for her work, including the Carol S. Knox Award from the New York Civil Liberties Union Capital Region chapter in 2015, among several others. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll try not to be like really gross boiled vegetables like my mom used to give me. I'll try to be a little better than that, but I'm glad you're staying, and hopefully you'll continue to stay and hear our next speaker too. So I got involved in this work from the case of Yasin Araf in 2004, 2006 was his trial, and I'm not going to talk about that because I don't have time, but it was an extremely unfair case, and it opened my eyes, and Steve Downs I worked with on that, to these cases, and we started studying them, other cases too. And we learned that after 9/11, the US government, the FBI, had this model where they have to prevent another attack, and they don't care how much damage they do in the process. It was basically like Dick Cheney had this 1% doctrine, which is translated with the FBI as if there's a 1% chance that somebody, and that's the somebodies that they're looking at is the Muslim community. If somebody might someday in the future engage in some kind of terrorism, we have to stop them now. So they look and they try to figure out who someday might do something. And so they look at things, and they don't even know what they're talking about. They look at things like, is the person very religious? And if they're very religious, they're a lot less likely to really, but this is how the FBI was looking at it. Maybe the person is critical of what the US government is doing in other countries and posts something on Facebook about that. And then the FBI decides, oh, they might do something in the future, so we're going to send an informant in and target them and try to get them to say something bad. So anyway, we studied all the cases that the Department of Justice called foreign terrorism cases and convictions, where they got convictions, and it was basically all Muslims, the people that they put on this list. It was 608 cases, and we studied them all in our new report, which just came out the other day, called Inventing Terrorists. We got it designed nice, it has pictures and graphs, and we go through all of our statistics, and basically, we found that out of those 608 cases, 70% were what we call purely preemptive cases, where there was no actual crime going on. It was either a sting operation where the person wasn't doing anything, the informant targeted them for whatever reason, and very often they targeted mentally ill people and got them to say something bad on tape, like inciting them, showing them videos of atrocities that the U.S. was committing, things like that. Got them, people that were very susceptible to manipulation, and there were many cases like that. There were 70%, as I said, pure preemptive prosecution, where there was no crime going on besides these fake cases, and then another 23% had some crime going on, but not terrorism, some kind of fraud or immigration fraud or something, and they turned it into a terrorist case. They treat it as a terrorist case. So in total, 93% of those 608 cases were preemptive in some way, either purely or what we call elements of preemptive prosecution. So very, very few were actually people who committed acts of violence. Almost nobody on that list actually hurt anybody, killed anybody, actually did anything. And the informant cases, they don't actually do anything, they're fake. So about 30% of those cases are sting operations. And I'll just mention a couple examples of them. One is that you may have heard of is the New Group 4 case, and that was people that weren't even saying anything. They didn't have any political thoughts at all. They were these 4 guys that were down and out. They had been in prison before for minor things. They weren't even really Muslim. They had sort of converted in prison, but they weren't particularly, they didn't really know a lot about the religion. When they got out, they weren't really practicing. And this informant, who was the same informant in our case, Shahad Hussein, went down to the mosque in Newburgh, New York, this impoverished community. He was kicked out of the mosque because he was saying, stuff about jihad, and they got tired of him and they kicked him out. And he was in the parking lot when he met this guy named James Cromedy, and they started trying to con each other into something. Shahad Hussein conned James into this sting operation by offering him huge amounts of money, jobs, cars. Finally offered him $250,000 when he tried to back out. So then he got 3 other people at the end and offered them $5,000 each. And these were guys who had no jobs, hardly no. One of them was like homeless and schizophrenic. One of them was using drugs, and they had nothing. They had no driver's licenses. They had nothing, and they offered them $5,000, and the main guy $250,000. So that's clear entrapment. But the way the law works, and I'll talk about that later when we get to our recommendations, there is no entrapment defense anymore. You're supposed to be able to show that if you were entrapped, that's a defense, right? But it's not anymore, because the way the law works is they say if you don't back out of the plot, then that shows you were predisposed, and then you weren't entrapped. So that's a problem with the law. Another example is this young man named Rezwan from Boston. Very smart guy, got an engineering degree, but then he became mentally ill, and he was to the point where he lost like 50 pounds, and he wasn't eating, sleeping. He was even wearing diapers at one point when this informant thought, oh, he's a good target, and I can get him to do something, and worked on him, tried to get him to fly a drone into something, and when Rezwan finally started getting mental health treatment and started seeing a psychiatrist and started taking medication, the informant told the FBI, and they said, well, we better arrest him now before he backs out when he starts getting better. And they swooped in and arrested him, and he was sentenced to, I think, 17 years. So there's a lot of cases like that where they prey on seriously mentally ill people or people who are vulnerable for other reasons, maybe low IQ, or they're very just susceptible to manipulation. And then another tactic that the government uses in these cases is the material support for terrorism laws. The way it works is if there's the government calls certain groups designated terrorist groups, and then they say if you have any connection with that group, you can be charged with material support for terrorism, even if you're trying to help a group be peaceful and not be violent, or if they have a charity and you're just trying to help non-violently and you're not trying to support violence at all, you can still be convicted of material support for terrorism. And the Supreme Court in 2010 said that's okay, you don't have to have intent to support violence to be convicted of material support for terrorism. And one of the worst cases with that is the Holy Land case, which Omar Suleiman referred to, where you probably know about it. It was the largest Muslim charity in the United States, and they were convicted of material support, not even for giving money to a designated terrorist organization. They were giving money to civilians in Gaza that desperately needed the aid, and it went through these Sakat committees, and the government charged them and said that Hamas, which is on the list, controlled the Sakat committees, and the first trial was in this trial, the second trial, they had anonymous Israeli intelligence officers testifying, and you couldn't cross-examine them because they were anonymous, and it was just so ridiculously unfair. And they got convicted, and these were the pillars of the community, the best humanitarians that were raising so much money to help other people, and they got sentenced to 65 years in prison, and they're about my age, so that's a life sentence for them. So that was, and then there's other cases where, similar to our Mahana case, where that was also the material support law was used very unfairly there too. So those two things are probably the worst aspects of how the best tools that the government has to get these kind of convictions in these unfair cases, these sting operations and material support. There's also classified evidence that plays a big role, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Many of these people actually were sentenced to life in prison. And in our report, and by the way, if you're interested in our report, we will give it to you for a donation. We have them up here. You can come up afterwards, or outside the back door, we have them too, and we'll have people take donations for them. And it goes through all the stuff that I'm talking about in great detail. And there's an article that Steve Downs wrote that's part of the report that talks about the life sentence cases, which we really got to pay attention to, because these people are never going to get out unless we do something to help them. And these are innocent people, and some of them, the Holy Land Foundation is one, and that's 2 or 3 of them got what are basically life sentences. Aslan Alashi, Shikri Alabakar, maybe Muhammad al-Husseini, you might get out. Anyway, and Afia Siddiqui, who you may have heard of, I'm not going to describe her case, it's a little bit different, but very unfair case as well. And she got 86 years for attempting to shoot soldiers, which she didn't do. It was clear, the forensic evidence showed that it couldn't possibly happen. And Ahmed al-Wali, who was sentenced to life based on a tortured confession, where he was tortured by the Saudis at the behest of the U.S. government. Then they brought him back here and charged him based on that tortured confession, and then argued that he wasn't actually tortured, and he got life. And then there's the Fort Dix 5, that was a sting operation out of New Jersey, where there were 3 brothers, the Duca brothers, and a couple other people, but the Duca brothers were basically convicted of a conspiracy to attack Fort Dix that they did not even know about. They were trying to buy guns so that they could shoot them at a rifle range, not to do anything illegal with them, but they weren't allowed to have guns because they were undocumented. So they had that charge that they could have gotten them on, maybe legitimately, sort of legitimately, although it was just for the rifle range. But then they connected them to this other supposed sting, well, this other conspiracy to attack Fort Dix, which was really just an informant talking to another guy about it, that the Dugas didn't even know about. They all knew each other, but they didn't know about that. And the informant even said that at the trial, but the judge said, well, that's like all one conspiracy, so those 3 brothers of one family are all doing life in prison for a conspiracy they didn't even know about. And Pastor Hussein, who spoke yesterday, he wrote a really good article about that case called Christie's Conspiracy, because Chris Christie was the Attorney General of New Jersey at that time, and he thought it was wonderful that these guys got convicted under his watch. So it's on the Intercept. You can look it up, Christie's Conspiracy, the Fort Dix 5. So those are the lifer cases, but then we get to something more hopeful, which is I've seen some finally hopeful trends with some judges, which it didn't used to be the case. After 9/11, the judges got just as paranoid and scared as a lot of the people in this country, and so they were going right along with what the FBI was trying to do. They were sentencing people to life. They were doing all this very unfairly. But now, over the last year or so, we've seen several judges, just not all of them by any means, but it's like the spell of fear is starting to wear off on some of these judges. And so we had one good example of it is the Virginia paintball case. There were several people who got life sentences just for, well, 2 people in particular that I'll talk about, Saifullah Chapman and Masud Khan. They went to a training camp for LET in Pakistan, and just they didn't have any particular plan. They weren't sure what was going to happen, what they were going to do or not do. But they went to this training camp and they shot guns there. Okay, and other people were playing paintball here, and they didn't have any particular plans to do anything, but they were just thinking about stuff. And then they came back and they weren't doing anything, but they got convicted under these firearms laws of shooting firearms at the training camps, not hurting anybody. But they got life sentences for that based on a definition of crime of violence that says if the judge thinks there's a substantial risk that they might in the future, sound familiar, use violence, then they can get a life sentence based on that firearm charge. Well, luckily, last April, the Supreme Court said that definition, and it wasn't about Muslim cases, but that definition is used in a lot of different laws, and they said that definition, when you don't even look at the facts of the case, and you just say there's a substantial risk that the person might be or will use violence, that is unconstitutional. And they threw out a lot of these cases, and so say Philip Chapman and Mr. Masim Khan, who had these life sentences, went back to the same judge, Judge Brinkema in Virginia, and made this motion and said these convictions are now unconstitutional. These life sentences need to be thrown out. And she looked at it and she said, okay, I am looking at the facts of the case, and I don't think there was a substantial risk of violence by them. And that is a big thing for her to say that, because that shows opposition to this preemptive model. The preemptive model is saying we're afraid that they might do something in the future. She's saying no, they weren't going to. And she let them out. They got out life sentences, and they got out a few months ago. And the Supreme Court just had an argument in another case with this same definition, and it looks like a lot more people are going to be getting out because that they're going to, it's a little complicated legally, but they're going to uphold that, they're going to uphold the idea that these charges, these firearms charges, are unconstitutional when they use that definition. So that was really hopeful, and then there were a couple other people who got new trials who had been convicted a long time ago, post 9/11. Lawfare of Preemptive was convicted basically based on tortured evidence from people in Guantanamo, and it came out more recently. Those people, since there's been more evidence coming out in the Guantanamo cases and about the torture that went on at the black sites and in Guantanamo, and it came out that the people said, no, he didn't do anything, he didn't know that he was convicted of helping somebody set up a safe deposit box or post office box, and the idea was that he supposedly knew that this person was connected to Al-Qaeda, but he didn't know, actually. And the only evidence that he knew was from torture of people in Guantanamo. So they said, no, he didn't know, and there was no other evidence. So the judge gave him a new trial, and so that's coming up. And then there was Hamid Hyatt in California, who got also a super long sentence for going to a training camp, which he didn't even go to. It was, again, based on a false confession. And he just got a new trial after about 20 years. So there's other judges that are starting to relook at these cases when they get brought back up and say, actually, now that I look at it again and this cloud of fear isn't hanging over me so much, I'm starting to see it more clearly and see these are wrongful convictions. Okay, all right, so in our report, which again, I hope that you can get a copy of this and maybe donate to the Ramadan Fund for the prisoners at the same time. But in our report, we have a section at the end called the recommendations, and the main part that we're focusing on with that is the bill that I think Mel mentioned in the beginning, the ego relief bill. And it has three parts to it. It goes after these problems that I was just talking about. The first part is to actually create an entrapment defense, a real entrapment defense. They don't have one now in the law. It's just based on cases, and it got destroyed by the judges. So it would get Congress to say that they cannot convict somebody in a sting operation unless the person was already taking substantial steps to commit some kind of crime before they started manipulating them. They have to be doing something already besides just talking. It could be if they're actually planning something and it's just talking, that's one thing. But if they're just saying something vague, like, oh, somebody should do something about what the U.S. is doing with the drones or whatever. They're just making statements that's protected by the First Amendment. Then they can't be convicted of a sting operation if the government then sends an informant and then manipulates them. They have to already have been doing something, taking steps, moving in that direction really substantially. So that's the big part of it. And then the other part is to fix this problem with the material support law and say that you have to actually have intended to support violence to be convicted of material support for terrorism, which is considered a violent crime. So it only makes sense that there has to be evidence of intent to support violence. And then the third part of it is something that people think is already the case, which is that when a lot of these cases have classified evidence, and in our case, in Yassine-Aref's case, there was a ton of classified evidence that was given to the judge. We found out later it was all fake. I mean, it was basically saying that he was somebody else who was in Al-Qaeda, who died, that person died, and clearly was not Yassine. We didn't know that that's what they were saying because we didn't get to see any of the evidence. The lead trial attorney, Terry Kinlan, got a security clearance just so he could see that evidence and never got to see any of it because the court said, and this is the way the standard is legally, that you don't get to see that evidence unless it's favorable to the defense. And the judge is reading this thing saying that Yassine is an Al-Qaeda bomb maker, which is certainly not favorable to the defense, except that the Sixth Amendment said you get to confront the evidence against you and show when it's false. And we couldn't show it was false because we didn't even know what they were saying. So this part of the bill, the legal bill, is saying that if the prosecution gives classified evidence to the judge, then they have to also give it to the defense attorney if they have a security clearance. It sounds like a no-brainer, but that's not how it works now. And so those are the three parts that we're trying to get introduced in Congress in the ECO bill. And we hope that you can help us with this. You could stop by our table, you could talk to any of us, and we could put you on our mailing list. We're going to be moving forward with this in the future, and hopefully we can get somewhere with it because we can't. It's really hard to defend these cases when the law is stacked against us. So, all right, I'll stop there.
I know a lot of this might seem kind of obscure, but I really want you to imagine this. Imagine you with children. Imagine your teenage son, right? Confused like all teenagers are. And someone at the mosque approaches him and starts saying all sorts of crazy stuff. We need to do this, we need to do that. Your son says, I really don't want to talk to you, I'm not interested. The person doesn't stop. He keeps going after your son, calling you, waiting outside your house for him, etc., etc. Your son says, I really don't want to talk to you about this. He keeps going, more and more and more, more and more and more. Finally, your son just says, you know what, okay, fine, I'll talk to you, just leave me alone. And the guy says, you know what, maybe you can just lend me a phone card, just buy me a phone card or something. And your son says, oh, you know what, okay, fine, I'll buy you a phone card. Boom! Now your son is going to get arrested and put in prison for the rest of his life for material support for terrorism. This stuff we're hearing about is not a joke. This is not something that's like, obscure legal stuff. This is stuff that could and does happen with them in this city and elsewhere. And if you think you're immune to this, or your family's immune to this, or your children are somehow always going to know the right thing to do, just imagine what it's like to be bothered by somebody, what you do eventually just to get them to go away. That'll land your child in prison for the rest of their life, underground. This is very serious, and we need to take it seriously. Okay, our last speaker is Hawa Wehelie. She is an attorney and business consultant based in Washington, D.C. Hawa holds a JD and MBA from Howard University. Since 2010, she and her family have been directly impacted by the discriminatory policies and programs targeting Muslims. They have been placed on terrorist watch lists, face continuous harassment at the U.S. border, or under FBI surveillance, and most significantly, her brother Yusuf Wehelie was a victim of entrapment by the U.S. government and was later given a harsh prison sentence of 10 years in July 2017 for the pretextual crime of possession of a firearm and felony. A sentence 292% longer and at the upper end of the federal sentencing guidelines. Hawa serves on the board of Coalitions for Civil Freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I want to thank ICNA for giving us the opportunity to share our story. This is only the second time that I'm speaking publicly about my brother Yusuf's case, the United States versus Yusuf Wehelie. It never gets easier. I'm still unpacking the trauma that my family has experienced from the unfair and prejudicial prosecution of Yusuf. My family and I are still suffering from the consequences of being subjects of the surveillance state. There's a stigma and fear that silences us once we hear the T word. Labeling something as terrorism or being even remotely associated with terrorism does all the work for the government. There's absolutely no public scrutiny about these cases. Reporting in the New York Times and the Washington Post, credible news sources, simply parrot the FBI's press releases without looking further into these cases. Branded as terrorists and terrorist sympathizers, you're now an enemy of the state. There's no due process of law, and contrary to public opinion, we do not have an adversarial legal system. Over 90% of criminal cases, including terrorism cases, end in a plea deal. In fact, there is a penalty to go to trial. You face the full total counts of all the various charges the prosecution can bring against you. There's so many different ways the government can use the same basic set of facts and bring in 5 or 6 different charges that add up to the equivalent of life in prison. Yusuf's case coincided with the birth of my legal career. I was sworn in as an attorney a month after he was sentenced, where I and every lawyer and judge in this country swore and took an oath to uphold the laws and principles enshrined in the Constitution. Guarantees of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, the right to a fair trial, due process of law. Yet America has taught me that there's a stark distinction between the theory of law and the practice of law. In practice, this Constitution does not offer any safeguards to our community. These notions of justice and equality, the very Constitution doesn't apply to people like you and me. Rather, these notions of justice and equality before the law are not safeguards for our community, but rather are sources of our humiliation and of our oppression. It's important to remember that there is indeed a correlation with U.S. foreign policy and military action abroad, and the nature of who's getting targeted for these domestic prosecutions, and the nature of who's targeted in immigration policies that exclude certain people from certain shithole countries is all related. The FBI admitted to targeting my brother Yusuf for a terrorism investigation. Under the current FBI guidelines, the FBI can initiate an assessment prior to a preliminary investigation. The FBI can authorize informants and other surveillance tactics without any factual basis or even any particularized suspicion that there is criminal conduct. The FBI's preventative policing model assumes that there's a specific path to radicalization that is inherently racist and fundamentally discriminatory against Muslims. In assessing whether a person of interest may be radicalized, and Kathy mentioned some of these factors, but it includes increased religiosity, your political interests, expressing concern or any affinity for the welfare of Muslims abroad. Even experiencing a recent loss of humiliation could be seen as a factor. Your travel history, if you travel to certain countries that are flagged by the United States, countries like Yemen and Syria and Libya, your social media posts, your online activity. These are all factors that the FBI can consider legally, while the Department of Justice has strict express guidelines prohibiting racial profiling. There is no explicit ban on profiling on the basis of religion or national origin. Therefore, giving a loophole to law enforcement to profile based on religion. Yusuf's case begins in 2010 when he and our older brother were placed on the no-fly list, and he was detained in Egypt on a trip back to Yemen. Our older brother spent 3 months in limbo, where he was interrogated daily by the FBI. And Yusuf, although he returned home earlier, he was secretly held in Egyptian jail at the request of the U.S. government, and for 3 days, where he was blindfolded, interrogated, and assaulted. Their case gained national coverage, and with the assistance of care, they were able to return home and removed from the no-fly list. It's safe to assume that our government kept a close watch on Yusuf ever since this ordeal. As a young man of Somali descent, unemployed with a prior felony, having traveled to the Middle East, experiencing trauma, he was a prime target for a terrorism investigation. In December of 2015, Yusuf met a good practicing Muslim brother from Atlanta. He was a family man. He had successful businesses. He cared about the community. This good brother turned out to be an undercover agent who sought my brother's conviction. From their first encounter with the agent in 2015 to his arrest in July of 2016, Yusuf was under daily and constant surveillance. Drones followed him, his phone was tapped, there was cameras placed along the street where we lived, watching who entered our home and left. There was a FISA intercept in our home recording our intimate conversations. Daily and constant surveillance. In February of 2016, the undercover posing as his friend offered to pay him to transport firearms, and Yusuf agreed. He took the firearms from one undercover agent and dropped it off to another undercover agent. He was arrested 5 months after his possession of the firearm. This was his only charge. At the time, Yusuf was having trouble finding a job due to his background, still suffering from PTSD and from his torture in Egypt, which the FBI was not only aware of, but manipulated. While this is not an excuse for Yusuf's actions, it's important to emphasize that he did not commit any other crime. And at the preliminary hearing, the government admitted that the firearms offense had nothing to do with terrorism. At the sentencing of my brother, the case focused on statements that he made to this undercover agent on March 30th, 2016, during a 3-hour conversation, where 5 minutes where he conjured up hypotheticals of violence were emphasized, and the remaining 175 minutes of that conversation were ignored. The prosecution admitted that the statements were unrelated to the firearms offense, and they would not support prosecution of any other crime, not conspiracy, not material support. It wouldn't even bring in terrorism enhancements. Yet, and the prosecution deemed a 46-month sentence would be appropriate. At the hearing, the presiding judge, Bruce Lee, repeated the refrain, "Context matters," throughout the proceeding. He ignored the very context of my brother's words. He ignored the fact that Yusuf retracted his statements and his views on ISIS, and that he was the one who ended the contact with the undercover agent. He ignored the fact that Yusuf refused the undercover's request to send blankets to ISIS soldiers fighting in Syria, which, if he would have agreed, would have been a material support charge carrying a 20-year to life sentence. He ignored the fact that the prosecution admitted that while these statements were inflammatory, they did not constitute a true threat, that they did not result in any additional charges, and there was no evidence whatsoever that Yusuf would pose an actual threat. The context that did matter for Judge Bruce Lee was that my brother was someone who traveled to Yemen. He was someone who followed ISIS. He went on certain pages on social media, and he visited certain websites, and he cried watching certain videos of war in Syria. And because of that, the judge sentenced my brother to 120 months in prison, 10 years, a sentence nearly 3 times higher than this recommended guideline. According to a recent report by the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, Muslim defendants on average receive 4 times a higher sentence than their non-Muslim counterparts. For example, a Muslim defendant received a sentence of 211 months, while his non-Muslim counterpart received a sentence of 53 months for the same exact crime. The rationale behind this harsh sentencing is that Muslims are portrayed as uniquely dangerous and violent. They cannot be deterred or rehabilitated. This is similar to the 1980s and 90s accusations against the black community during the war on drugs, where young black men are described as relentless super predators, and they received harsh sentences for low-level, non-violent drug crimes. Americans across the political spectrum realize now that the young black drug offenders were unjustly characterized as super predators, and they recognize the harm that this has caused the black community, which has now led to the reduction of drug-related sentencing. Fears of Muslims as violent terrorists, radicals, and extremists continue to dominate public discourse today. Politicians and judges are pressured to look tough on terrorism. The courts have imposed life sentences on Muslims in cases that would normally require minimal or no jail time, even cases where no crime was actually committed, like cases where Kathy mentioned Abia Siddiqui, Ahmed Wehelie, Ali al-Tamimi, and the Duka brothers. There must be change in how the American public perceives Muslims and the war on terror at large, in order for us to institute reforms that will help reduce prison sentences and end preemptive prosecution. The U.S. government uses preemptive prosecution to justify their egregious budgets allocated to defense and law enforcement in the name of fighting war on terror. The FBI has a $3.3 billion budget, and these are resources that need to be used and justified. A significant portion of this budget goes to informants and undercover agents who are used in nearly all terror-related cases. The FBI maintains a roster of over 15,000 informants tasked with infiltrating the Muslim community in the U.S. For every official informant, there are 3 unofficial informants. Informants are paid as much as $100,000 per assignment, or some need to work off past criminal or immigration violations. So this creates a very dangerous incentive structure. In the high-profile case in Minnesota, where a total of 9 young Somali American boys between the ages of 19 and 22, at the time of their arrest, were entrapped by the FBI. They were all friends from the same community. The case against them was built on audio-recorded conversations by a friend who turned informant. This friend informant was paid over $100,000 for his services. Yet they were all convicted for conspiracy to provide material support for allegedly planning to travel to Syria. 6 of the men took a plea and were sentenced to 10 years. 3 of them went to trial: Mohammed Farah, Abdulrahman Dawood, and Omar. They were all convicted by a white jury who deliberated for more than 2.5 days before returning a guilty verdict. Mohammed Abdulrahman was sentenced to 30 years in prison, and Omar was sentenced to 35 years. These boys did not intend, nor did they ever commit any violent act. And in fact, this particular case was used to justify increased funding for a counterterrorism program in Minnesota to further surveillance and police the Somali community and the Muslim community in Minnesota. The use of informants by the FBI is reminiscent of the Gestapo in Nazi Germany. The secret police included Jews who cooperated with the Nazis. The Jews often worked with the Gestapo in deciding what Jews were taken away. And for their cooperation, they received temporary advantages. They were given extra food, exempt from forced labor, protection for their family. However, eventually Hitler's gang came for them as well. The modern-day Gestapo example is the case of Eric Hendricks. Eric worked for the FBI, he paid the FBI informant for over 5 years, and he honestly thought, his words, that he was helping to find the radical Islamic terrorists. He helped to build over half a dozen cases of alleged extremists, and he was later himself entrapped. Federal prosecutors and the FBI said that he spent months trying to recruit ISIS sympathizers online, and the FBI office has commented, confirming and denying whether or not he worked with the FBI. And he was charged with material support, sentenced to 15 years in prison. So the next time you hear about an FBI foiled plot, or any terrorism case for that matter, I hope you remember the story of my brother, or the story of the brothers I've just mentioned, or that we have heard yesterday during this conference. And I hope that you think critically about these cases, and ask deeper and important questions that lead you to the truth of what is actually happening to these Muslim brothers today. There's so much misinformation and secrecy involved in these cases, so it's very easy to miss the truth. The reality is that we are all subject to mass surveillance. We're all subject to strict control whenever we travel. We're all actually in danger of having our lives intruted by the state. So our silent complacency is only adding to our oppression. We have a civil responsibility as well as a religious and spiritual obligation to speak truth and to stand up against injustice. So I ask you today to get involved. If you're being harassed by the FBI, if you're having travel issues, if you're experiencing discrimination, do not be silent. Get in contact with us. We want to hear your stories. Get in contact with CCF, CARE, and please don't remain silent. So, lastly, I want to say, as we approach the month of mercy and compassion, to have compassion for the Muslim prisoners and to donate to our Ramadan campaign, where you give Muslim prisoners $100 towards their commissary. You have no idea how impactful this is for them. Anything that you can give would be helpful, and we appreciate it. I will just close with a dua that I usually like to say. May Allah bless our thieves and forgotten brothers, our thieves and forgotten sons, our fathers, with the beauty of patience and the strength of faith and the honor of wisdom. May Allah also bless and love our mothers, increase their patience and their strength, because they are also in prison. And may Allah grant ease and free all political prisoners everywhere. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much. We now have time for some questions. Anybody have any? And I would also just want to remind you, when like there's a news report or you see any news about the FBI accusing somebody or the government accusing somebody or Homeland Security accusing somebody, you should not believe these accusations. And that's not some kind of, I'm not, it's not like a political propaganda I'm describing. The government has they have the burden of proving that what they're saying is true. The accused has the presumption of innocence. So the presumption is the person's innocence. Until the government proves that what they're saying is true, they don't get the privilege of you just believing them. And what happens a lot of times, by the way, is the first indictment that the government releases is actually, they don't even intend to try and prove this stuff. It's just a bunch of stuff to scare people. And later on, they do what's called superseding, and they're all superseded with crimes that they actually want to charge the person of. So the thing that you read about in the news about what the person allegedly did, that might never even be in a trial. It's just there to intimidate people, to convince the judge it's a serious case. And this is really important. The government the burden of proof is on them to prove that somebody's done something wrong. We don't have the obligation to believe it. We have the obligation to presume the accused person is innocent. Okay. Yes, question. And then you can say, if we can take 2 questions, and then you can say who you want to answer the question, or if it's anybody. Go ahead,
Should I stand up?
Why not?
So thank you for sharing your stories. So hearing your story, I couldn't help but feel that all of us are really in the same position. We could all be in the same position. We're from an MSA in New York City, and we've had undercover agents within our MSAs. A lot of people who have been entrapped and been charged similarly. So how do we, as Muslim Americans, engage in speaking out against injustice and advocate for different people without isolating ourselves politically and endangering our own careers and freedom? So groups like Canary Mission, which you're in right now, you're actually on the page and you're labeled anti-Semitic, even though it's totally not true. It's complete bullshit, right? We're also worried about that because we want to speak out against fasting. We want to speak out against Israeli human rights violations. We want to speak out about what the U.S. is supporting in Yemen. But at the same time, you can't help but feel next time I go on for an interview, if I'm on Canary Mission or if I'm anywhere else, I might not. My entire career is over. So how do
the question is, how do we, since you're young people, how do you sort of speak out or be active on these issues without, isolating yourself and putting your career at risk? I mean, the young gentleman brings up an example of Canary Mission, this website, which, lists quote-unquote people, basically people who are actively critical of Israeli policies. So very good question. Another question, yes?
Thank you again for sharing all this information with us. My question is about the bill. It's about the bill for classified evidence, which is to be shared with the internal security. Can we know more about this bill and how we can participate as Muslims in our community or with our
more information about the bill.
and how we can be helpful?
About the Eagle bill, it's not introduced yet, so it doesn't have a bill number, but if you want to come up afterwards and get on our mailing list, we can give you more information on how you can support it in the future. Anybody can do that. And first question.
It's very difficult for me to answer the first question because it's, you Google my name and you see what comes up. And I know it's affected my career in a significant way. I know it's going to continue to impact my life. My brother's case, every time I travel, I'm stopped and questioned about it. So it's just the fact. I mean, for me, especially with career and money, I believe in it is time to just do this, and your sustenance comes from Allah. It's written before we even came to this world. So having belief in that, and truly it will come. So I don't think by doing this or doing that, it's going to stop what Allah has already written for you. And one thing I'll say from this whole experience, you would think Alhamdulillah, it has really brought me much closer to Allah. And there is this paranoia that you get, right, from being constantly under surveillance. Like the FBI is listening to me, and they're in my home, and wherever I go, and what websites I go to, you can honestly drive yourself absolutely nuts by focusing on that. And what perspective I take from that is like, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the all-seeing, the all-knowing, is witnessing all of it. And that is the only gaze that we should be concerned with. And what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, what we do, what the Sunnah asks us to do, and what Allah asks us to do, we will truly be successful here and wherever we go, inshallah. And Allah will
I would also say, I'm glad you asked the question because it's really an important thing to know. One, things are getting better. I mean, I know it's just dangerous to say that kind of thing. The situation now, imagine 10 years ago, or 12 years ago, or 13 years ago, talking about young black men being shot by the police. I mean, if you had told me 15 years ago that young black men being shot by the police, I'd be like, oh, they must have done something wrong. I'm like an educated person. I'm a Muslim. But now think about the awareness about police violence against black people. Now everybody knows it's undeniable that police officers are randomly shooting on our black people, right? This is, talking about the use of law enforcement against minority communities. This is like a thing you can talk about in mainstream society, and it's actually sort of shows that you're woke and cool. 10 years ago, it was like somebody coming to you and telling you about space aliens built the pyramids or something like that. So things are a lot better in general. But I would say, so first of all, something like Canary Mission. I love, Canary Mission is great for my, they keep track of all the talks I do. I remember doing my CV every year. Where did I do this talk? I'll go to Canary Mission and check. And the point is, now it's kind of cool. Hey, I'm on Canary Mission. But I would say this is my advice to you, as young people. Just be very mature in your expression. So there is, again, go and find me somebody who wants to defend Israeli government policy. Just let somebody come up here and defend the war in Yemen. Let someone come up here and defend the U.S. war in Afghanistan. Those are the people who have a hard time. If you're saying I condemn the Israeli government policies or U.S. militarism or broad, these are just reasonable points. So when you speak out on these things, as long as you're just careful about what you say, people might disagree with you, they might attack you because they don't like the message you're sending, but the points you're making are very reasonable. And they'll be vindicated. They're already being vindicated. When you see the people who really suffer are the young people especially who are unmeasured in what they say. So let's say something, they'll talk about a certain group of people. And this is a lot of it is sort of a product of kind of Twitter culture and social media culture. People just express themselves thoughtlessly and realize that this is going to get remembered forever. So anytime you write something on Twitter or Facebook, it's okay in fact, it's not even okay, it's great, and now it's actually cool and interesting to criticize things like U.S. militarism abroad, use of justice and things like that. But just do so in language that is not going to make you look racist or bigoted or something like that. So there's certain words, we can all imagine what some words are. There's certain words that we should just delete from our vocabularies. Just never use those words. And there's great ways to criticize policies of any number of countries or any number of groups, and you never have to use certain words, certain images that are going to land you in trouble. And so I think as long as we're careful, not only is it good to be critical of the things we want to be critical of, but I think you will be vindicated and you'll be and nowadays when you look back at 1960s civil rights organizations, where everybody knows, these guys were heroes. Back in the 1960s, they weren't heroes. Right now, they're people who were very suspicious or suspect. But now, as Omar said, the arc of history has bent towards justice. Okay, okay, we'll take 3 questions. 1, 2, 3.
So when an informant doesn't function, it's always important to say that I think what if you do not have an attorney? Do you still say the same thing?
Yeah. Okay, the first question is, if someone talks to you, someone from a foreman or from the government, about what do you say? It's important to say for them to speak to your attorney. What happens if you don't have an attorney? Thanks.
Have you folks seen any change with the federal authorities and PI others on their means of preemptive measures as it relates to entrapment against the Muslim community?
Changes in tactics. Yes.
We find, if we suspect that someone is like undercover as an informant trying to influence, what action or what step we can take to rather
yeah. What do you do if you suspect
in terms of legal?
Yeah. I mean, so it's important to keep in mind, these informants, often they come in to start talking completely crazy stuff. I mean, they'll be like, yeah, man, we gotta go to jihad in the mosque. Or whatever, man. So sometimes they really spout nonsense. What do you do about that? Sometimes if you don't do anything, you might be seen as, why did you say something? Why did you say something? If you're interested, I'll let the panelists ask questions. There's 2 very good This American Life episodes. One called The Informant. So there's, the radio show This American Life? There's 2 episodes on instances where Muslim communities turned in the informant and the sort of drama that happens after that. So I recommend listening. You can look up This American Life, The Informant.
Yeah, as far as if you don't have an attorney, it's usually not an informant that you would want to deal with that because you don't know they're an informant. But if an agent wants to talk to you and you don't have an attorney, that's okay. You can say, give me your card and I'll have my attorney call you. And then you can call CARE or CCF, go on our website or contact CARE. They definitely will help you with that. I do that a lot. The agent gives you their card, say, don't let them in your house. Just say, give me your card, I'll have my attorney call you. And it doesn't matter if you don't have one yet, then you get an attorney from CARE or from us, and I'll call, or an attorney will call them and say, I am telling you not to talk to this person, and they respect that.
What if we already approached our parents?
If your parents already talked to them, it's too bad when somebody starts talking to them, but you can still say, no, you're not going to talk to them. You'll have your attorney contact them. Give me your card. I'll have my attorney contact you. That's all you say to them, and don't let them in your house.
You don't have to speak to them. Don't ever speak to the FBI, ever. It'll do no good for you, honestly. It's better to just keep quiet, get their contact information, and you can contact them.
And they're very tricky, and they can be very friendly. And, it's okay. You're not in trouble. Looks kind of strange if you don't talk to me, but, what are you trying to hide? Can I just come in and talk to you? No, my attorney will contact you. Give me your card. That's it. It's okay. What was the other question? Was about change in tactics over time? We talked about this a little bit yesterday. It started out where they were targeting kind of pillars of the community, like the Holy Land 5, and then they kind of ran out of targets like that. They started targeting more individual, troubled young men, mentally ill people, very vulnerable people, and that's been going on for a while, and we'll see if it's been slowing down a little bit now. Since ISIS has kind of fallen apart, a lot of people that it was really anti-ISIS lately, but so there have been changes over time, but it's still going on. Hopefully it'll slow down more now, but we still see new cases quite a bit.
I think we have to end in just like 3 minutes, but Brother Sabri wanted to give say something about the Ramadan fundraiser. You're going to come and use the microphone? Yeah. Oh, there's a microphone over here the whole time. We've been using.
Just quick, with the question you just asked a couple before this one, like Allah says, to speak the truth and be just, and the Prophet ﷺ also said, so as you're saying, say stuff that's, you stand for justice, and you speak the truth, no matter what. I was incarcerated for 10 years, and the story goes on even longer than that, but I was one of the recipients of this $100 gift, and my name is right there actually, so this is someone over 10 years ago, Steve's wife. She hand-sewed every single name, and there's more names. So just a reminder and encouragement, if you weren't here yesterday, it's the same thing I said yesterday. Basically, that $100 shows concern, and it's like a touch of the outside world that somebody's thinking about me. And I remember the first time they started this program, a bunch of us were in the CNU, which is a very high security unit. And we're all, you can look up my case and other cases, but I have letters from Congress people and high-ranking military officials and professors from around the world. Like I was pretty much outstanding citizen according to the criteria. And it happened to me, as you were saying. It's not something that's like strange. I grew up in this area. I taught in this area. I have friends from all faiths and backgrounds, and it happened to me. I was acquitted in my first trial, and they came back a year or two later, subpoenaed me to a grand jury. And then they waited until I was in the middle of my master's program at Johns Hopkins to indict me. And this time, unfortunately, I was not acquitted, and I did about 10 years. So the point is, if you can donate and encourage others to donate and spread the word, because it's organizations like these that help and care about these prisoners that are being persecuted and treated unjustly. Like I was saying, in that situation in the CMU, a bunch of us looked in our commissary accounts and found $100. And we were all so happy, we're wondering, was this coincidence or what happened? Then we finally found out about this organization. And it was just a nice gesture for us, hey, there's people that still remember us. I was blessed to have family and friends on the outside that continued writing, but there's some brothers that were in there that had nobody. And that gift meant so much to them. So if you can afford whatever you can afford, inshallah, as you're walking out, donate. Take the website, you can donate on the website as well. And more importantly, spread awareness. Jazakallah khair. I'm sorry to take the time, but I hope you benefited and take some home with you.
Thanks for attending, and I'm sure if you come and ask questions, those speakers will be happy to address these questions you might have.